"You're my man now," said the Apache woman after the cowboy who once an enemy saved her. The wind howled across Spirit Bend Valley, dragging sand like sparks from a dying fire. Under the blood-colored moon, Aylin ran barefoot, bleeding, breath slicing the dark. Behind her, the wolves had found her scent. Their eyes gleamed green in the dust, wild with hunger. She stumbled, fell, pressed a trembling hand against her torn shoulder. One wolf crouched low, muscles coiled, ready to leap. Then thunder cracked. A gunshot ripped the silence apart. The beast dropped midair. Through the veil of sand, a man appeared on the ridge, Jonah Mercer, face carved by years of sun and sin, long coat whipping in the wind. His rifle smoked in his hands, his eyes cold as riverstone, for a heartbeat. The desert froze, one soul fleeing death, another hiding from it, bound together by the single sound of a bullet echoing across the Red Valley. Would either of them survive what came next? Dawn crept over Spirit Bend Valley, bleeding gold through the red stone towers. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the hush, the hiss of sand against the cabin walls, the sigh of the wind between canyons. Inside that small wooden shelter, wedged between cliffs, the smell of smoke, blood, and sage hung thick. Jonah Mercer moved like a man used to silence. His cabin was spare one cot, a half-built table, a Winchester by the door. He cleaned his hands in the basin, the water turning pink. The woman on his cot hadn't stirred since the wolves. He didn't know her name, only the weight of her body when he carried her through the dustlight as a secret, heavy as guilt. Jonah was 35, but his face looked older, lines carved deep from sun and solitude, hair touched by silver too soon. 3 years alone had stripped away the sound of laughter from him. He had once worn the blue of the cavalry, guided men through these same valleys, until one night ended everything, an ambush gone wrong. Apache blood spilled where there shouldn't have been any. His wife and boy were caught in the crossfire of that vengeance. Since then, Jonah had traded war for isolation and conversation for penance. He stitched the stranger's shoulder with slow precision, each thread biting deeper than memory. When it was done, he poured whiskey over the wound and muttered, "That's all I can do." The words rasped like sandpaper. Outside, the sun climbed higher, lighting her face. She was Aylin, though he didn't know it yet. Her skin held the warmth of copper clay. Her dark hair, tangled and dusty, shimmered like obsidian under the light, even wounded. Her posture carried defiance. Her eyelids fluttered, and a low sound escaped her throat. Not pain exactly, but resistance. Jonah turned away, reached for his canteen, and stepped out into the valley. The horizon stretched endless, red mesas rising like tombstones of gods. He took a long drink, eyes fixed where the land met the sky, every dawn. He told himself he'd leave this place, ride north, start again. But each day, the land held him fast, whispering in the dry wind, "You haven't earned forgiveness yet." Inside, the woman stirred again. Her hand found the rough blanket. Her other brushed the stitched wound. Her lips parted around words heavy with accent and suspicion. "Where am I?" Jonah's voice came through the doorway, flat, unadorned, alive. For a moment, neither of them moved. Outside, a hawk screamed overhead, circling. Inside, two souls, one carrying sin, the other carrying loss, found themselves trapped beneath the same roof, in a land that remembered every drop of blood spilled on its dust. The light inside the cabin shifted with the wind, thin, gold, and sharp as a blade. Aylin blinked against it, her vision swimming between fever and memory. The ceiling was rough pine, the smell of smoke and whiskey thick around her. When she tried to sit up, pain burst from her shoulder like lightning. From the corner came a low, steady voice. "Don't move, you'll tear the stitches." She turned her head toward it. Jonah Mercer sat by the table, sleeves rolled up, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate strokes. The sun slanted across his face, catching the lines around his eyes. He didn't look at her. Her throat felt like sand. "Why?" He glanced up, puzzled. "Why what?" "Why save me?" The words cracked, half in English, half in Apache rhythm. "White men see my kind dying. They look away." Jonah set the rifle aside, met her gaze for the first time. His eyes were gray, cold, but behind the steel was something quieter. "I didn't see a kind," he said. "I saw someone bleeding." Aylin let out a breath that trembled between disbelief and fury. "You wear the coat of soldiers. You hunted my people." His jaw tightened. Not anymore. Silence filled the room, dense and brittle. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters like restless bones. Jonah rose, poured water into a tin cup, and held it out. "Drink." She stared at his hand, scarred, calloused, a man's hand that had known both creation and destruction. She hesitated, then took the cup. The water was cool, but her eyes never left his. He nodded once, satisfied, and stepped back to the window. "You should rest. The wolves won't be back. The wolves are not what I fear." That made him turn. There was no defiance in her tone this time, only truth. Jonah studied her, how the firelight etched her cheekbones, how the darkness in her eyes didn't come from fear, but from history. "I'll ride out tomorrow," he said finally. "Find herbs for your fever." Aylin shook her head faintly. "No, you should not. If they see you—" He frowned. "Who, my people?" Her voice lowered to a whisper. "They'll kill you before you speak a word." Jonah's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Wouldn't be the first time someone tried. The attempt at humor fell flat between them. Aylin's breathing slowed. "Then why stay here, soldier? Why hide among ghosts?" He turned away, eyes tracing the horizon beyond the window. "Because the ghosts don't talk back." For the first time. Her expression softened. In that single line, she understood him, at least a part of him. The silence that followed wasn't the heavy silence of suspicion anymore. It was the fragile quiet that comes when two people recognize pain in each other. Later, when he thought she was asleep, Jonah sat near the fire, sharpening his knife. The metal rasped in rhythm with his thoughts, through half-lidded eyes. Aylin watched him. He wasn't the monster she had imagined. He moved carefully, almost tenderly, like a man afraid to break the world any further. Outside, the desert sighed under the fading sun. Shadows stretched across the sand, long and thin. Somewhere out there, something howled wolf, wind or spirit, she couldn't tell. But inside that cabin, for the first time since the hunt began, Aylin felt the faint pulse of safety. She whispered something in Apache, a word that meant between storms. Jonah didn't ask what it meant. He just added another log to the fire, his face lit briefly by its glow, before both sank again into quiet. And in that quiet, the distance between them began to bend slowly, like a branch learning the shape of the wind. Days turned to weeks beneath the burning sky. The desert didn't forgive, but it allowed those who endured it to breathe again. In that harsh mercy, Jonah and Aylin began to move around each other like wary travelers sharing the same fire. The first morning she managed to stand. Jonah found her by the well, her arms still bound in cloth, trying to lift the bucket with her good hand. She refused his help at first, jaw clenched, hair whipping in the wind. But when the rope slipped and the bucket fell, Jonah caught it before it hit the ground. "You don't have to prove anything," he said quietly. Her chin lifted. Weak does not mean helpless. A small curve touched his mouth. "No, it doesn't." He handed her the bucket. She met his eyes, then really met them, and for the first time. There was no hatred there, only something uncertain, searching. The days after were filled with small, wordless exchanges. Jonah mended fences that didn't need mending, pretending not to watch her as she swept sand from the floor. Aylin hummed low songs in her own tongue while grinding herbs, melodies that softened the edges of the long afternoons. Sometimes, when the wind grew too still, he caught her studying him, the faded scars across his knuckles, the chain of his wife's locket tucked under his shirt, the way he stared at the horizon as though expecting judgment to ride out of it. One evening, clouds gathered for the first time in months. A strange, heavy quiet settled over the valley. They stood outside, watching the sky bruise purple and gold. Aylin's voice broke the silence. "This land remembers everything. Blood, tears, even songs. My mother said the wind carries all of it." Jonah nodded. "Then the wind must be tired." She glanced at him. "You mock what you don't understand. Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I'm afraid to believe it." The wind picked up, stirring dust between them. Aylin turned toward him. "Why do you live alone?" "Jonah Mercer." He hesitated. "Because I led men into a place they shouldn't have gone. And because I'm still alive when better people aren't." Her expression softened. "So you punish yourself. Seems fair." "No," she said. "Punishment is for those who can still change. You only hide." The words struck harder than she knew. Jonah looked away, the memory flashing in his eyes smoke, screaming, the sound of a child calling his name. He said nothing. That night, rain came for the first time, not much, just enough to turn dust to scent and fill the air with the taste of metal inside. Aylin sat by the fire, her hair damp, eyes glinting in the flicker. Jonah watched her from across the room. "You ever think about leaving this valley?" he asked. "This is my land," she said. "My people's bones are here. Where would I go? Somewhere you're not hunted." She looked at him steadily. "And you, where would you go?" He didn't answer. The fire popped. Outside, thunder rolled low over the mesas. The next morning, Jonah saddled his horse and rode west for supplies. When he returned, he carried something wrapped in cloth, an old silver pendant, simple and unadorned. "Found this in town," he said, setting it beside her. "They said it's from an Apache trader. I thought maybe—" Aylin traced the metal with her fingertips. "You thought I'd forgotten who I am?" He shook his head. "I thought maybe you'd remember you're still here." For the first time, she smiled. It was brief, but it warmed the cabin more than the fire ever did. Later that week, a dust storm rolled through the valley, fierce enough to rip shingles from the roof. They spent the night holding the door shut, sand seeping through every crack. When the worst had passed, they slumped against the wall, coughing and laughing breathlessly. Jonah wiped grit from his face. "You ever think this land's trying to kill us?" Aylin leaned her head back, eyes half closed. "If it wanted us dead, it would have swallowed us already." He laughed softly. "You sound like you trust it." "I do. Because it has no reason to lie." In that moment, as the dawn light bled through the cracks, Jonah looked at her differently. He saw not an enemy or a survivor, but the pulse of something alive in a place that had forgotten how to forgive. Days later, They found a young Apache boy collapsed near the well, fevered and starved. Jonah carried him inside without hesitation. When Aylin realized the boy belonged to a nearby band, her eyes widened. "If they find you here, I'll take him back myself," Jonah said. "You'll die before they let you cross their camp." He met her gaze, calm and firm. "Then I'll die trying." When he returned the boy safely that night, dust covering him like ash, Aylin met him at the door. Her voice was low, trembling just enough to betray her heart. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. Jonah shrugged. "Didn't want another ghost on my conscience." She stepped closer, eyes glistening in the firelight. "You don't understand, Jonah Mercer. Men who kill and men who save both leave marks on the wind." He tilted his head. "What kind of mark do you think I leave?" Aylin hesitated. Then, almost in a whisper, "You're my man now." He froze, not knowing how to breathe. The words hung between them, half a challenge, half an admission. And somewhere outside, the desert wind rose again, carrying with it a sound that could have been laughter, or maybe mercy, learning to speak again. Outside, the last traces of sunset bled across the cliffs. The air smelled of rain that would never come. Jonah sat on the porch steps, whittling a piece of cedar, his mind still tangled in the words she had said, "You're my man now." From the distance came the faint rhythm of hooves. He stood, hand hovering near the rifle, until a small figure emerged through the haze, the Apache boy he had saved days before. The child's pony was thin, its sides heaving, but his eyes were bright with something Jonah hadn't seen in a long time. Trust. The boy slid off the saddle, holding out a bundle wrapped in deerskin. "From my father," he said in halting English, "for the woman who sings to the wind." Jonah took it carefully, unwrapping herbs and a strip of dried meat. Aylin stepped beside him, her eyes soft. "It means thank you," she whispered, "for bringing his son home." Jonah nodded once. "Tell your father I didn't do it for thanks." The boy smiled, almost shyly. He said, "The wind remembers." Then he turned and rode back into the fading light, the dust swallowing him whole. Jonah watched until the sound of hooves disappeared, the echo lingering like a promise, one that neither man nor land could yet name. By the time the fever took her, the valley had gone silent. No birds, no wind. Only the ragged sound of Aylin's breath and the scrape of a chair against the cabin floor as Jonah Mercer kept pacing. Helpless. Sweat clung to her skin. Her lips cracked when she whispered something in Apache. He couldn't understand the words, but he understood the fear behind them. He pressed a hand to her forehead. "Tell me what you need." Her eyes fluttered open, black and distant. "Red Mesa," she breathed. "Under the white stones, there's a plant. It stops the fire inside." Jonah froze. Red Mesa lay 2 days east, deep in the Apache lands, the same lands his old regiment had burned to ash. "If I go there, your people." She cut him off with a weak laugh. "They'll kill you. But if you wait, I die anyway." Outside, the sky was turning copper. Jonah glanced at the rifle by the door, then at her face, and nodded once. "Then we ride at dawn." They left before sunrise, the horizon just a bruised line above the red cliffs. Jonah rode with her slumped behind him, her hands barely clutching his coat. The horse's hooves struck sparks on the dry rock. Each mile carried the taste of iron and dust, and each mile pressed heavier against his conscience. Around noon, the world began to change. The heat shimmered strangely, and the wind came alive. Jonah looked up. Clouds of red sand were spinning out of the canyons, rising like a wall. "What is that?" he shouted over the wind. Aylin's head lifted weakly. The red wind. It tests the living. Within moments, the desert disappeared behind a curtain of dust. The horse screamed, nearly throwing them. Jonah dragged Aylin down, covering her with his body as the storm roared. Sand tore at his face, biting his skin raw. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe. When he opened his eyes again, she had collapsed. Her lips blue. The storm howled around them like a chorus of spirits. Jonah ripped a canvas from his saddlebag and crouched over her, holding it up as a shield. The wind tried to tear it away. He couldn't touch her. She had spoken of a curse, of a belief that a white man's touch could steal her soul. And yet she was dying beneath his hands. He looked down at her, whispering through clenched teeth, "To hell with curses." But instead of lifting her, he did something else. He dug his knees into the sand, buried himself to the waist, and pinned the canvas in place over her. The storm hit like a fist, screaming, clawing, but he held on. Hours passed, or minutes, he couldn't tell. When at last the wind died, Jonah's hands bled from gripping the fabric. He slumped forward, half buried. The world glowed red beneath the sunrise. Aylin stirred beneath the canvas, alive. Her first word was his name, Jonah. He turned, choking on sand in relief. She reached for him but stopped short of touching his face, her fingers trembling in the air between them. "The wind kept you," she whispered. "That means it forgave you." Jonah almost laughed, but his voice broke instead. "Maybe it just ran out of people to kill." She smiled faintly. "No, it chose." By dusk they reached Red Mesa. The cliffs loomed like crimson cathedrals, streaked with veins of white stone. Aylin guided him to a narrow bend in the canyon where the shadow lingered even at noon. There, between rocks, grew the plant small, gray-green leaves edged with silver. Jonah crushed it with water from his canteen and helped her drink. The bitterness burned his tongue as he steadied the cup to her lips. For the first time, he touched her skin. She didn't flinch. When she finished, she looked up at him with eyes that no longer held fever, but something deeper. "Why do this for me?" He hesitated, searching for an answer that didn't sound like confession. "Because I can't watch another person die when I can stop it." Aylin studied him. "You think saving me saves you?" He shook his head. "No, I just want to do one thing right before I'm gone." A sound echoed from across the canyon, laughter, hard and mocking. Jonah stiffened, hand dropping to his revolver. 3 riders emerged through the dust, rifles slung low, whiskey glinting in their saddlebags. "Well, look here," called one, Charles Pemberton. His grin was slick with arrogance. Didn't know the soldier took to trading with Indians now. "Keep riding," Jonah said. His voice was calm, but the air around him went sharp. Pemberton's grin widened. "Oh, I see plenty worth taking, horse. Gear." His gaze slid to Aylin. "And maybe a squaw to keep the night warm." Jonah's jaw locked. "Don't." The other men chuckled. One spat into the sand. "Don't what?" "Soldier, don't take what's already been claimed." The gunfight lasted seconds. The first man dropped before his words finished leaving his mouth. The second fired wide and caught Jonah's bullet in his chest. Pemberton's horse reared. He turned to run, screaming curses that the canyon swallowed whole. When silence fell, Jonah stood breathing hard, smoke curling from his Colt. Aylin stared at him, pale but steady. "You would kill for me," she said softly. Jonah holstered the gun. "No, for peace. You just happened to be where I didn't want to lose it, for the first time." Her lips curved into something close to a smile. "Then I will try not to die again." They camped in a hollow beneath the red cliffs. The fire crackled, the air still heavy with gunpowder. Jonah sat cleaning his weapon. Aylin watched the sparks drift upward like spirits. "Why do you live alone?" she asked suddenly. He paused. "Because I deserve to." "Deserve what?" The silence. Aylin's gaze lingered on him. Unreadable. Silence is not punishment. It's death that moves slow. Jonah looked into the flames, hearing his wife's voice in the crackle, his son's laughter in the hiss of wood. He whispered, "Maybe that's all I ever wanted to stop moving." She reached out then, resting her palm lightly over his wrist, the first time she had touched him by choice. "Then stop running," she said. "But not here, not yet." Above them, the wind shifted, soft and low, as if in agreement. By dawn, her fever had broken, and the desert was quiet again. Quiet, not like before, but alive, waiting. The journey back to Spirit Bend Valley took 2 days. The air carried the smell of rain and gunpowder, the kind that clung to the skin like regret. By the time Jonah Mercer and Aylin reached the cabin, the valley had changed. The light seemed softer, the wind less cruel. But Jonah knew peace in this land never lasted. Aylin could walk again, though slowly. She spoke little, her thoughts somewhere between the cliffs and the people she had left behind. Each night, Jonah caught her standing at the ridge, eyes fixed toward Red Mesa, as if listening to voices he could not hear. When the riders came, he knew before she did. Hoofbeats echoed across the valley long before the first figure appeared through the dust. Hokla, her father, tall on his bay horse, gray hair tied back, flanked by 6 Apache warriors, and beside him rode Roken, his young lieutenant, his stare sharp and unyielding. Jonah stepped outside, rifle resting but ready. The air tightened, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Hokla dismounted first. He looked from his daughter to the man beside her, his gaze ancient and heavy. "You live," he said in Apache. Aylin bowed her head. "Because he saved me." Rokan's laugh was short, bitter. "He saved you or claimed you." He spat into the dust. "A white man hides our chief's daughter in his den. What does she owe him for that kindness?" Jonah said. "Nothing." His grip on the rifle tightened, but he kept the barrel down. Aylin's eyes flashed. "I owe him nothing. I stay because I choose to." Rokan dismounted, fury burning behind his calm. "You shame your blood. Aylin, your mother died keeping our people pure." Before Jonah could step between them, Hokla's voice cut through the tension low. Commanding, final, enough. He drew something from his neck, a pendant carved from black obsidian, smooth and ancient, and threw it into the dust between them. "Whoever spills blood before I pick this up," he said, "will lose his right to call himself child of Red Mesa." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses stilled. Then Hokla turned to Jonah. "You walk on sacred ground. Soldier, do you think the wind forgets what your kind has done?" Jonah met his eyes. "No, sir. I think the wind remembers too much. But it also carries her voice. And that's the only one I listen to now." The chief studied him for a long moment, then spoke with quiet gravity. "If you keep her with respect, not with chains of flesh, but with the weight of your word." Roken's fury flared. "You would give her to him." Hokla didn't turn. "I give her to no one. I release her from what binds her." He bent, picked up the pendant, and pressed it into Aylin's palm. Freedom cuts sharp. "Child, step carefully." He mounted again. "When the fire comes, remember wind does not choose sides. It only carries what men leave behind." Then he rode away, his men following like shadows swallowed by the desert light. Only Rokan lingered, His eyes locked on Jonah's, full of unspoken challenge. "You think this ends? Because my chief rides away. The wind will change again." Jonah's voice was calm. "Then let it. I've lived with worse storms." Rokan turned his horse, spurring it hard, vanishing into the heat shimmer. Aelin stood watching the horizon until the dust settled. Her father's pendant gleamed dark in her hand. "He didn't forgive," she whispered. Jonah's reply was quiet, almost tender. "No, but he gave us a chance to deserve it." Inside the cabin, the fire flickered low. Jonah poured water into a basin, washed the dirt from his hands, and finally let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Aelin set the pendant on the table beside them. "The wind has stopped," she said. "For now." He answered, "It always finds its way back." She turned toward him then, her face lit by the flame, voice soft as the night air. "Then we'll face it together." Jonah met her gaze, and for the first time since he'd buried his family, he believed it might be possible outside. The valley slept beneath the pale moon. The silence was not the silence of guilt anymore. It was the silence of something waiting to be reborn. That night, the valley did not sleep. The wind had turned strange, coming from the north instead of the canyon, carrying with it the dry scent of mesquite and smoke. Jonah Mercer sat on the porch, sharpening his knife, while Aelin ground herbs inside, humming softly. The rhythm was calm, steady until she stopped mid-note. "Something moves out there," she said quietly. Jonah's hand froze. He had felt it too, the horses restless, the air heavy. He rose, loaded both rifles, and doused the lantern. Darkness swallowed the cabin, broken only by the glow of the hearth. "Stay low," he murmured. The first arrow struck the door with a hollow thud. The second shattered a jar near the shelf. Then came the war cry, raw, high, and heartbroken, Roken. His voice tore through the night like an old wound reopening. Flames leapt outside. The corral had been set ablaze, lighting the yard in violent red. Through the smoke, shadows moved 3, maybe 4. Jonah steadied his breath, lifted the rifle. "They came for you," he said. Aelin's reply was calm, almost sorrowful. "No. They came for pride." Another arrow whistled through the window. Jonah fired once, saw a figure drop behind the flames. The other scattered. Then the sidewall cracked. Roken burst through, blade flashing in the firelight. The two men collided, crashing into the table, splinters flying. Roken slashed Jonah's shoulder. Blood soaked the sleeve instantly. Jonah hit back with the butt of the rifle, the sound of bone meeting bone. They grappled, brutal, wordless. Aelin shouted his name, firing once not at Roken, but at the barn latch. The shot shattered it. The horses bolted, thundering through the flames, scattering embers and men alike. The sudden chaos broke the fight apart. Rokan lunged again, fury blinding him. Jonah caught his arm, twisted. The knife clattered to the floor. The fight went to fists, close and desperate. Finally, Rokan swung wide and missed. Jonah's counterblow sent him staggering. It was Aelin who ended it. She stepped forward and struck him across the temple with the rifle stock. The warrior dropped to his knees, dazed, blood streaking his cheek. "You lose," she said, voice steady, eyes like black fire. "Not because I choose him, but because I never belong to you." Rokan looked up at her, something breaking behind his anger. He drew breath to speak, but found none. From beyond the flames came new hoofbeats, many this time. Hokla and the warriors of Red Mesa rode in, their torches slicing through the smoke. The old chief dismounted, taking in the scene the burning corral, the wounded men, the daughter standing unbroken beside the man he had once called enemy. Enough, Hokla said, and the word itself stopped the wind. Rokan tried to rise, but the chief's glance pinned him down. Honor is not taken by force, he said. It is earned by restraint. Remember that, if you wish to live among men. The young warrior's voice cracked. I wanted only justice. You wanted ownership, Hokla answered. And that hunger destroys all tribes, white or red. He turned to Jonah. You understand this, do you not, Jonah? Bleeding but upright, nodded. I do. And still you stay. I don't take her, Jonah said quietly. I stay, if she'll have me. Aelin stepped forward, her face streaked with ash and tears, her breath trembling but her stance firm. He will stay, she said. Not as master, not as savior, only as a man who listens when the wind speaks. For a long moment. Hokla looked at them both. Then he removed the small string of white bone beads from around his neck worn smooth by years of touch. He placed them into Aelin's hand. These belong to your mother, he said. She believed freedom has a price, but never shame. Let the wind carry that truth to you. He looked once more at Jonah. The land may yet forgive, if you keep it with respect. With that, the chief mounted his horse and rode into the dawn, his men following in silence. The last torchlight vanished into the canyons. Jonah stood still until the sound of hooves was gone. Then he looked down at his wounded arm. Blood soaked his sleeve, but the pain felt distant, like a reminder of something already healed. Aelin tore a strip of cloth and pressed it against his shoulder. Her hands were sure, gentle. You should have let me face him, she murmured. Jonah managed a faint smile. I think you did. They worked through the rest of the night, stamping out the flames, burying the men who had fallen to their own anger. By sunrise, smoke rose in thin gray ribbons from the ashes of the corral. The cabin still stood, blackened but whole. Jonah leaned against the doorway, sweat and soot streaking his face. Guess I'll have to start over again, he said. Aelin looked toward the cliffs, where the first light touched the stone's gold. Then build where the smoke can't reach. He followed her gaze. The valley stretched endless before them, harsh, beautiful, unforgiving. Yet in that morning light, it no longer looked like a place of punishment. It looked like a place to begin. 6 months later, Spirit Bend Valley was in bloom. Wildflowers pushed through cracks in the red rock. Stubborn bursts of yellow and blue against rust-colored earth. The new cabin stood farther north, near a spring. The corral was rebuilt, the garden fenced, rows of corn and wild sage growing side by side. Jonah stood on the porch, whittling a wooden handle for the plow. His shoulder ached when the wind turned cold, but he no longer counted scars. Inside, Aelin hummed as she ground cornmeal, her dark hair loose, a single white bead woven near the end her mother's. The sunlight caught it, turning it to a spark of fire. Jonah glanced at her from the doorway. You never told me what that bead means, he said. She smiled faintly. It means freedom bought with truth. My mother's words. Good trade, he said. She set down the bowl, wiping her hands on her skirt. Do you regret leaving the silence? He looked out toward the cliffs, where wind rippled through the sage. Every day, he said, except when you're talking. Her laughter came soft and quick, fading into the whisper of the breeze. She walked closer, eyes glowing in the light. Then face it now, she said quietly, because you are my man now. Jonah froze for an instant, the words hitting deeper than any bullet. He looked at her, really looked, and the lines on his face eased. If I am, he said, it's because you taught me how to live again, outside. The wind rose, weaving through the garden, through the open doorway, through their joined hands. It carried no curses this time, only the faint scent of cedar and the echo of laughter lost and found again. In that wind, the valley spoke once more, not of ghosts or guilt, but of renewal. Two souls, one who sought forgiveness, one who gave it, stood together beneath a sun reborn. And Spirit Bend, the valley that had once devoured the living, breathed softly, alive again.